Hello, world. Welcome to the Speed Strength Show. I'm Braden.
I'm Tommy.
I guess that makes me Zach. What's happening, boys?
Is that your opening
Now you
line?
got to say your thing.
No, it's not my opening line.
Oh, you got to share your opening line.
Boys, to stand to wipe or to sit to wipe?
Who stands?
Yes, that was the first thing I thought.
Really? That usually splits a crowd, man.
Really?
Does it really?
Yeah.
What crowds are you in?
I don't even know if I want to know.
Up north. Really?
Oh, that checks out.
Well, I started as a stander and was converted to a sitter.
You started as a stander like when you were 4?
When you wipe? No, it's like university.
What do you mean you started as a stander?
I was a stander. The stats literally are like 54% stand, or no, 54%
They take stats on
like
this?
46. Oh, for sure.
Man, you did so much more research before this than we ever do.
Of course, I got notes on it.
I
So
can't
both
keep it
standards, I
together
think.
right now.
No, we're sitters, man.
Oh,
Standing is
sitters.
ludicrous.
Well, I feel left like the odd man out here.
You said you've been converted.
It's true. It makes more sense. Once you sit, you'll never stand again.
That's
But
why I was like, why is this guy even asking this question? Like, it's not even a question.
It is. Ask more people. You'll see it splits the crowd generally. A little bit more on the sit side, but there's some standards out there.
I mean, like I have stood before, but it's definitely not as nice.
Interesting. What scenario did you have to stand?
Well,
Like
sometimes
a public toilet, you don't want to sit at all.
no, just
He
sometimes.
just hovers. So
You gotta
hovers
say
over.
you're just hovering.
No, sometimes you do your business and maybe you've had some nachos with jalapenos the night before, maybe things aren't feeling too clean, raw perhaps, and it's a little painful, so you don't get the job completely done, and maybe you got to come back at a later date and finish her up, and in that
It's almost like
situation
it's a double take.
it's a double take. Exactly. Yeah.
So you've left the bathroom and then realized that it's not fully cleaned up, and you come back.
Well, yeah, maybe it's not that it's not clean, but like
It's just not right.
it's just not right. Exactly. And sometimes you need to wipe, but you don't need to drop another load, so
No, for sure.
you don't got to sit all the way down.
It's like courtesy wipe. Maybe you're at somebody else's house. And
Well, there you go.
Like I said, I still can't even believe this is a question because I feel like there's a way to do it and there's a way to not do it.
Well, that's just not true.
Why is there even a debate
Think about
around
it.
that? Because
if I was a stander, that means my pops was a stander. That means his pops was a stander, right? That's passed on generation to generation.
Well, now that you've been converted, is your kid going to be a stander or a sitter?
Sitter, of course.
Okay.
You got to optimize.
that's what I mean. Like, so this is the part that confuses me is that if there's a way to do something and it's clearly the better way to do it, why is there even still consideration for the old way?
Well, because you never knew the new way. I didn't know the new way to university. And it took a while. It felt weird. It felt weird. And then you get used to it. Your body wants to stand. I was standing and then sitting back down. It's like
Just
instinct.
absolute confusion.
But it makes more sense. You can do it one-handed. Like I have my phone in my one hand. Standing's a two-hand job.
Yeah, that's fair.
You got to put stuff down.
That's fair. Tom, I think you're just confused because we normally agree on these things 100%. So having a little bit of controversy is foreign.
Yeah, like I said, I'm also, well, first of all, it took me about a minute and a half to get my composure after, like I was crying at one point. I'm still wiping some of the tears out of my eyes. Like I was just,
evolutionarily, you wouldn't be like in your own room doing your business, right? You'd be out in the open with other guys.
Mm-hmm.
And I think standing would be the power move. Alpha probably stands. That's probably why it's passed down in the Marchildon generation. It was the alpha move. Alpha stands above all while he wipes.
Is this a historical thing that you've learned about in your studies? As you were talking about the interesting history of osteopath and chiropractic medicine, and is this something that has come up? Like, is that where you got the
Multiple
idea? Because you're talking now about the
Read,
history.
read a
of,
history book. Read a history book, Tom.
I do like
you just want
history.
him to tell you.
You always got to come back to history.
There you
That's
go.
where true knowledge is, man.
I am interested to hear the. I don't know if it's a story, but if you've got converted, I want to know how that happened. Who saw you standing in university and told you a better way?
It was kind of the other way around. I saw someone sitting. I'm like, what? Because to me, it didn't make sense. Like your hands in the bowl almost. Like, whoa. Like, I hope you're washing after.
Of course you are.
But then went around the room, and most guys were sitters, so I had to sit. And got me.
Sorry, I can't keep it together.
Oh, that's good, man. That's good stuff.
But it'd be interesting to see like 50 years from now, like that population of alphas is slowly going to go down.
Well, yeah, I mean,
And
I
we'll
guess
just be sitting. People will be sitting to piss in. Like there won't even be standing pissers anymore. World's changing, man. It's easier to sit. I get it.
it is easier to sit. I don't know. I think urinals will still be a thing. I think maybe I wouldn't be surprised if women's washroom got like the equivalent of a urinal at some point.
I think that would already have happened. Have you?
I could see the cell phone changing things though.
I've seen the
Because
prototype.
people are so glued to
It
their
doesn't work.
phones.
Yeah.
That I could see
Mhm.
like
Sitting.
yeah, just becoming the universal thing because nobody wants to leave their phone for a couple of seconds to go to the bathroom. They want to find a way to remain on their phone as they go to the bathroom.
Have you seen the study they've done on kids? I forget if it was under 15 or 13. They're starting to develop a horn on the back of their head.
That's not true.
Yes, it is.
No, it's fucking not true.
Yeah, so Wolf's Law, right? Bone changes shape on lines of force. So on their phones, on their computers, whatever, most of the time of the day, it pulls on the musculature and ligaments on the back of the head and slowly pulling a horn out of the back of their head. Might be true, might not be true. I don't know. I think I heard that somewhere.
Okay.
Unreliable.
It definitely depends on the source.
I guess I could see it. I could see that being a thing. We're
Just
definitely
going around a 13-year-old and feel the back of their head.
well. Now I got to feel mine, and like, what does mine feel like? You know?
Yeah, have I developed? I don't think I've had a phone long
Pretty
enough
flat,
to
I
develop one
guess.
of those. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think I'm good.
World's changing.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm worried about
Yeah.
that. You got me thinking.
Worried
about
about
it now.
getting a horn?
Yeah, I think I'm good though. But
You got to throw the phone away, Tom.
yeah, I got to get
You
rid
don't
of
want
it.
to be. You don't want to be the 60-year-old with no horn in a world of horns, though. At the same time.
Yeah, that's true. Just
Yeah.
follow the pack, right? Fit right in with
Yeah,
everyone.
exactly. Just like a sheep. All the sitters.
All right.
Voice.
Well, smooth transition here.
I think I
Audience,
finally
you've
have my
probably
composure
noticed-
back.
Oh, that's good. But definitely pumped to have Zach back again.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, and I mean, last one was going to be movement. It was in a way, but a little bit more movement and mobility today. I think is the plan.
Beautiful.
Yeah, a little more movement. How do we apply it? How does it
Mhm.
relate to recovery? Right, because that's kind of your jam. You're the recovery guy.
Well,
That's your title. That's what I'm going to call you.
And a lot of
The French sniper's gone, huh? It's just the recovery guy now.
I guess on air, you're the recovery guy.
Feels like a demotion.
That's not the intention.
But yeah, a lot of the concepts we're going to talk about are influenced by the fluid movement pump that we talked about last time.
Mm-hmm.
So if people haven't, then they should go check that out first. I think anyway, at least the first bit to get the basics of it, and then come back over here. Yeah. So Did you want to? I think Tommy had a lot more questions than I did to kick this off. Did you want to get it rolling, Tom?
I wouldn't say it's a lot of questions, but I have a few. Like, I'm definitely curious to hear about this idea of like fluid movement is such a, as you talked about last time, like it's the life giver in the sense that we use fluid to deliver nutrients everywhere in our body, and we use fluid to remove the waste products and the garbage out of our bodies. So anything we can do to promote fluid movement within our body is a positive thing. Correct? Would you agree with that, Zach?
Oh, 100%.
And so one of the things I'm thinking about is on days that either Braden or myself or anyone else who's working with athletes and clients, what are we prescribing to them on days that we consider quote unquote recovery days? And are the methods we're using actually maybe moving fluid around the body the way that we need to actually promote recovery to the best of our ability based on some of the things you touched on last time. So one of the big questions I had for you is, do you think there's a specific type of movement that is best for promoting the muscle pump activity and getting fluid moving around? Is running better than biking or rowing or walking? Or maybe there's I don't know, like an elliptical or whatever else is out there. Is there a certain type of movement you think that is maybe at the top of the pyramid in terms of making fluid move the best in the body?
So again, I always come back to like the most simple answer for these types of questions. And like you could argue like, oh, more muscle groups, you're going to get like a larger muscle groups, more muscle groups, you're going to get more of a pump. But I see it more as not like there's a fancy exercise. It's the consistency of exercise. And it's also a great opportunity to build on skills of the athlete, of the person. Like a lot of the people I worked with always have some sort of skill, like, oh, I want to be able to do a chin up or like do 10 chin ups or something like that. And it's like, okay, well, this is a great opportunity. Every hour on the hour, you're going to go to your chin up bar, you're going to do one chin up or something like that. Or handstands, another big one. We're going to start, every hour on the hour, or depending how busy the person is, every 2 hours. Like it's more on the consistency of the pump than like, I have this fancy exercise, you just got to do it once a day, then you can lay down the rest of the day. Like it's not going to be like that. It's just a great opportunity to build on skills for that person and whatever their goals are.
Right. Because you mentioned last time how like the body's a vacuum essentially. So if you're moving fluid in one area, then you're pulling from another area. So I guess that means like whatever the exercise is doesn't matter too much because it's still going to get things moving.
And like there's other factors, like it'll just increase the heart rate, which will then also help move fluid around. But like if you're going to get someone to just do a bicep curl with one arm, like that's not going to be as effective as like a whole body squat or something like that, or like a more whole body movement where you're getting more pumps involved, more musculature involved.
So would it be safe to say then a whole body movement would be more effective than a smaller movement? But whether you pick from a whole body movement, whether you're squatting, biking, jogging, elliptical, whatever, rowing, then it doesn't really matter if you're using a large compound movement. That's safe to say. And then maybe you pick, maybe based on the soreness or the level of fatigue, like if you want more blood flow to the arms, and maybe you pick something like rowing compared to cycling or vice versa.
Exactly. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to like, because if you're talking about the consistency of the pump, do you think then that like maybe a 45-minute mobility routine would be like, for this purpose anyway, there's other factors involved, I'm sure, would be like more or less effective than doing like one squat every hour, essentially? Like you're getting up and you're doing one squat every hour, or you do all of your movement at one time, like that 45-minute mobility routine.
I would argue that splitting that up throughout the day, especially on recovery days, you're utilizing that pump a little bit more. And you're also just getting the person up, right? Rather than getting up for the 45 minutes and doing the stretch routine or whatever, you're getting the person up for 5-10 minutes every hour. And at least then they're not getting stagnant in their position. So a lot of those like immobilities that we can see is just from individuals staying too long in positions throughout the day. whatever, because of work or school or anything like that. So I would argue for the latter in that, like if you have an hour to give, let's split this up into 6 sets or 6 10-minute intervals or something like that. We'll tackle mobility that way.
Well, and that's a great point from a programming standpoint, because I do think a lot of practitioners, like you said, would, like as Braden suggested, here's a 45-minute recovery, mobility, whatever you want to call it, day or program or thing to do. But you've mentioned that breaking it up into smaller chunks might be the more effective way to do so. Like that's a great suggestion or alternative for anyone out there working with clients or athletes or anyone to maybe give that a try instead and see if you notice a difference.
Well, would you think about doing the same thing with your actual workouts? Like I wouldn't say like if you've got if you're planning a 6x1 on squats and a 6x1 on bench to like every hour do like work up to one
maximal set
and one set of one for each. Like I don't think that makes sense, but
I mean that already exists. That's the Bulgarian method.
Yeah,
where they had like 100 training sessions in a day, but they were also juiced to the gills, and that's why it worked. Like nobody talks about that. Everyone's like, "Oh, here's the Bulgarian method. It's so great." And it's like, yeah, but they were juiced to the gills so they could do this. If any average person tried it, they would probably die.
Yeah. Don't try the Bulgarian method on a whim. But what I mean is, like, do you think it makes sense to, if someone has the means or the time, like especially now when a lot of people are trying to get home gyms and stuff, do you think it would make sense to split your workout into like 3 or 4 chunks or something like that and do them throughout the day?
I think it'll depend on what the client or athlete or person wants out of their adaptation. So like to split up a strength or a speed training session into, 10-minute sections throughout the day, I don't think you're not going to get the same volume and load. I guess like arguably you're getting the same load, but you're not fatiguing the musculature in the same way or the nervous system in the same way that you would if you're doing it all in that 1 hour.
Yeah, the output probably isn't going to be there.
And even like you'll have to re-warm back up and cool back down. Like there might be a risk of injury there. But also you could have an argument too for the other side of that, in that how do we get better at, like I had a client who's like, I just want to be able to, with the guys, just be able to jump into a spike ball game or a baseball game without having to warm up really. It's like, well, how do we practice that? Well, we split your workup up. We keep it as safe as possible, but then we get you into exercises without having that crazy warm up, so that we build that ability to just like turn sympathetic, blood vessels open up, and blood gets to tissues quicker. And then again, like if the person's goal, just going back to the first point, is more weight loss, it might make more sense to get them up more so during the day than just that 1 hour. Because again, there's 24 hours in a day. And I always seem too that if I get somebody up 5 times, and like, let's say you only have to do 5 minutes, once they get up and they start moving, they feel great. And they'll end up doing a couple extra minutes. So you get a little bit more out of them, out of the output as well. So yeah, it depends on the goals of the person.
Yeah, for sure. I guess it would just be, if anything, motivation to be moving more often during the day. Because I think a lot of people will, like, they'll do their workout in the morning and then sit all day doing schoolwork or sit all day in the office or whatever, or sit all day and then do the workout later. And I think like getting people to get up and moving and walk around and whatever is sometimes not such an easy task as it seems it would be.
In my own experience too, and like anecdotally with my clients, and even some research I've seen, like people will say, I don't have the time to get up every hour and spend 5 minutes. But you see an increase in productivity in those other 55 minutes. When you get up, you move around, you almost like unfocus and refocus back on the task. So when you're sitting down for 6 hours staring at the same screen or whatever, you can really get lost in that, and then time goes by and you're not really that productive.
I mean, you can argue how many people at work get up every hour and go outside for a smoke break. It's not time to go outside for a smoke break. So, just quit smoking and then do 5 minutes of exercise instead. Like, yeah, I could see that working really well, especially for lower intensity things where you may not need to like have as strenuous a warm up. Like you could reasonably do 5 15 or 20-minute bouts in a day rather than an hour and a half workout, because you could cut down on the warm up. And like you said, depending on the skill or depending on the goal, it's an interesting method to use. And especially now where people are probably a little bit more stagnant with what they're doing in the day because they're stuck at home or things like that. You lose the moving around from like walking from A to B and here to there and doing things like that. Most people are probably just sitting at home doing nothing, and they probably have the opportunity to do something like that. So,
and again, it doesn't have to be crazy complex. Just walking around, like the act of walking, you're using almost every muscle in the body, and reflexively, there's so many things going on that you're going to see great benefit. I always find too is make sure you have an intent. Like, don't just tell the person, hey, I want you to get up and do 5 squats because I want you to move more. Like, have some sort of like, hey, we want to develop this skill, or hey, this is going to help your daily caloric output or whatever. Like, have some sort of intent, and then they're more motivated to get up, whatever that every hour, every other hour, what have you.
Yeah, definitely. It's important for people to, I guess, know why they're doing stuff, but even like know why it's important, I guess, but even more so than just like it'll help you recover a little bit better. Having a multi-dimensional purpose is nice for sure.
George St. Pierre's trainer talks about this, and it's a great way to develop skills. So if he uses the example of someone can do 10 chin-ups and you want them to be able to do more chin-ups, and then you do 10 chin-ups in one day, they're so sore they probably can't do chin-ups the next day, and then you'll get chin-ups the day after. But if we do 1 chin-up every hour for 2 days, you'll be able to do a lot more volume than you would be able to if you just kept it in that hour. So it's an opportunity to spread that volume out if that's the goal too.
Yeah, that's Pavel. Pavel Satsalin's grease the groove right there. Like, that's 100% that to a T. In terms of, you want to get better at a movement, do it more often. How do we do it more often? Break it into smaller chunks. And I've played around with some of Pavel's stuff. It definitely works. You get a lot better at whatever it is that you're trying to improve on. At least I've found.
Yeah, I think that applies to pretty much everything, even just finding a way to make it easier to get more work done or more feasible to get more work done. I have a friend who's, I've mentioned him before, an ultra marathon guy, and his like philosophy with training is just make it easy enough that I can do like a lot and a lot more. So like he always talks about all like 90% of the running he does is at a pace where he can have a conversation. Like, he's not pushing it, and then 1 day a week or 1 day every 2 weeks he'll push the pace and develop that skill. But for recovery and everything like that, it's important that he's not subjecting himself to that like high intensity, high impact all the time.
And that's a great point too. You have to be careful because, again, we're utilizing this as a recovery tool. We don't want to be utilizing this as a more of a stimulus. Like, you're just getting the person to do chin-ups all day and then they're just crushed all day, every day. You want to be careful and make sure you know the baseline of the person or the athlete and work off of that.
That was actually one of the things I wanted to ask you, Zach, was around the intensity of some of the movements or some of the things, right? Like, if we look at something like walking, running, cycling, rowing, you might be able to use heart rate or something like that.
Yeah.
Is there a bit of an ideal window to be in? Because obviously, if we have greater level of intensity, the heart beats faster, and then we move fluid more through the body, right? We talk like the volume of fluid that's moving through the body is greater. But then, like you mentioned, we don't want to go too far over the edge where now it becomes like a training stimulus and we're losing the ability for recovery to actually happen because we're stressing the system too much. Is there like an ideal window? Maybe you can provide an example if it's like heart rates when you're walking or cycling, or how do maybe you prescribe this stuff to people you work with in terms of the intensity?
Yeah, and it's going to be person dependent a little bit because, you know, some people can handle higher intensities than others. But what you just said there, or what Braden said, is the ability to still have a conversation. Like, we don't want to get to the point again where we're high intensity and it's more of a training stimulus and the person's breathing hard, they can't even have a conversation. And it doesn't, like, it can be like, I always use the gauge like kind of like a 6 or 7 out of 10. But it doesn't have to be that high. Like, you don't want to intimidate the person again, and then they're not going to do the exercise. It can just be a walk at like 2 out of 10. Like it's more of a spectrum than an ideal zone. And that's how I put it. And it's tough to quantify. Not a lot of people have heart rate monitors, or that I work with at least. And
I was just wondering, because so many people now with like Fitbits and smartwatches, it is something that's a little bit more, probably the most feasible or accessible tool compared to some other stuff. That's why I was just using it as an example for that.
So I try and keep them in their, what would be like the fat burning zone, which is like 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10, because it's again a great opportunity to burn some fat, which is a lot of the clients that I was seeing in the general population. That's the goal. That's everybody's goal. Burn fat, put on muscle. How do we do this? So yeah, I hope that answers the question, but it's not like an absolute number.
I like the conversation rule for sure, because I think everyone can kind of understand how that fits to them, versus a 6 or a 7 out of 10 is so subjective. And so like person dependent, where like in the powerlifting world, 6 or 7 out of 10 is a very legitimate training stimulus. And like a lot of work gets done in that area, so if you're like that, if you're having a rest day at 6 out of 10, like that's pretty tough.
They actually use that. I blew my mind in the Army. So when they're going for runs, and like they're like, I don't know, but I've been told, like everybody repeats back and forth. It's so that the leader can gauge like the conversation, like how well all the people can talk. And when one person starts to like not be able to participate in the chant, then he slows the pack down, or he'll speed the pack up. Like that's where that comes from, which blew my mind.
That's really cool.
That's really interesting.
I had no idea.
I like the idea of the talking thing though. Like that's because like both of you mentioned, it's someone with no prior fitness experience. Someone could have never worked out a day in their life. And it's like, hey, get on this bike and I'm going to talk to you the whole time. And you need to be able to keep a conversation with me. And if you can't, then we're doing too much. Like you said, it's a really, really easy thing to understand. And the Army thing is fascinating. Where did you hear that?
A friend told me. So it might not be real, but it made complete sense to me when he told me. But yeah,
identify the weak link.
And
Who's the worst in the platoon? Down. Who's the one person in the platoon you don't want to go into battle with?
Can't talk at all.
That person, get rid of them.
But it's not to say that you couldn't use this tactic as like an exercise stimulus. It's like, listen, you don't have time to get into the gym for an hour. We're going to do minimum effective dose. We're going to do 5 minutes, high intensity every 2 hours or something like that. If they have a bike or whatever at work, it's just tough. Like you don't want to get super sweaty or whatever at work. That you could use it either way. But from a recovery perspective, it's 5 minutes of just like light squats. Maybe you're walking around. So even to the point, like you're not going to get to the point where you can't have a conversation, or you even feel like your heart rate's increasing a lot, depending on the person. And it might be a person whose baseline's that low or whatever, but then you just work around that and with the person.
I really like the idea that we were talking about earlier about training yourself to not need a warm-up or a less time-consuming warm-up, or even just getting better at warming up, so that maybe you're just doing the same amount of stuff, but you do it faster or whatever. And I'm curious to see how you think about warm-up as well.
So when you think of the type of person who can just like get up and go, like who do you think of right away?
Children,
right? And children and Tommy is a child. And the difference there is a tissue difference, but the biggest difference is blood flow to the tissue. They just have so much more blood flow getting to their tissue. So when they want to get up and go, they can get up and go, and blood just starts shooting to the musculature super quickly. And if we think back to the conversation we had, what controls blood flow is that autonomic nervous system. So how well can we make that system efficient? Like why does a kid can just get up and go and they change their moods? It's like they're not stressed. They don't have a care in the world, right? So like my perspective on this would be, again, training towards it. Like you need some practice in being able to just get up and go or whatever from a small standpoint and work your way up. But even just from a stress perspective, like how well are you balancing that sympathetic parasympathetic nervous system so that you can get in and out? And breath's another great tool to get into those states as well. I used to, instead of doing like a movement warm up, I would do like Wim Hof or fire breath or hyperventilation type warm up. And 2-3 minutes in, I'm in a complete sweat. and then I'm ready to go. So it depends how you look at how you want your warm up to be. Like if you want potentiation and like there's things, fixes you're trying to utilize or whatever, or if it's just like, I got half hour for a workout, I'm only going to spend, 2-3 minutes warming up. What's the best way to do that? And messing around with those kind of tactics.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Using just like a breathing warm up, I think is fascinating. But also, yeah, like I guess that makes a lot of sense if adults are stressed all the time because we have bills to pay and things of that nature. Then it's the sympathetic is the fight or flight, right? Is that just like basally on a higher level so that it's harder to come in and out of it? Yeah.
Super cool.
Yeah.
It's an interesting idea on, like, as we're talking like about recovery, like on a day that like doesn't matter. Do you know what I mean? Like to me, there's at least from, like Zach, if you think back to when we trained at Waterloo in the off season, we had big lifts on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, right? Those were days that when Braden and I programmed that stuff, we felt like those were really important things. And that was going to give the athletes the stimulus they needed to adapt and get better. What we did on Tuesday, Thursday, or possibly Saturday with the athletes doing things on their own time, it was sort of like this, just the idea of moving around, getting some blood flow, and kind of recovering. I do like the idea of this like shortened warm up. Like we don't need to have, if we're not going to, trap our deadlift 400 pounds, for example, we don't necessarily need to have a really, I don't want to say really thorough warm up because then it sounds like we're kind of half-assing it on these other days. But like you said, finding the minimum effective, like, hey, maybe doing some breathing stuff and mobilizing a few chronically tight structures in the body for 5 minutes is all you need to then prepare yourself, like you said, to walk around or ride a bike at conversation pace or something like that. Like I really like the idea of maximizing the time on these recovery or off days to make it more feasible for people to do.
And even those high intensity days, like that's maybe if with an athlete, 1.5 hours of exercise, what are you doing the other, 22.5 hours? We want to make sure we're still moving and keeping those pumps going. But the athlete side of it, I remember, having an 1.5 hour workout, having an 1.5 hour shoot, and then 2 hour practice. It's like you almost got to work from the other end. It's like, okay, how do we decrease stimulus? How do we get you in a more restful state so we're sleeping better and sleeping way longer than the average person? It's like you got to play around with. I think the one podcast you said, Tommy, the one guy looks at the recovery first and then programs based off of
programs around the recovery tools.
And I think that's super important. Like assessment is everything. And then treatment or prescription is relatively easy based off of the thorough assessment.
That's a great point.
I mean, yeah, it's definitely always important. You always want to be trying to be more efficient with the time that you're using, and we talk about like if you're programming something, you always want to have a reason for it and like an intention with it. And I mean, you could have like everything in your program be really important and it's an 1.5 hour long workout, but could you get the same thing out of an hour or the same thing out of 45 minutes? And if you can, then it's worth the effort to at least try, for that purpose of just, I mean, especially I think a lot of people that we've worked with are university-ish level athletes, like students, and they don't have a lot of time. And I mean, especially basketball players, volleyball players, and people that haven't really been in the gym before don't necessarily want to dedicate all that time to it either.
And if they're an engineers are on a different school schedule than, like, as soon as you've worked in the varsity setting with an engineer, that just gives you a whole new appreciation for time management and like how busy people can get.
I did want to ask you too that Tommy brought it up that maybe you do like the breathing thing and a couple mobilization things. What do you think about like mobilizing like joints or different structures or whatever? What goes into your thought process there?
So it's a tougher question than can be led to believe. there's like, to what I asked first is there even an immobility issue? Sometimes a muscle's lost leverage. So let's say like with that pulley system we were talking about, if one side's short and one side's long, sometimes the side of strain is usually the side you feel sensation, not always, but sometimes. So, and then we start to stretch that long side. It's like, okay, well, number one, let's figure out to see if there's even an immobility issue. And then number two, how does that play into the compensation, the total compensation pattern? But that might be something you refer out to a practitioner who's going to be able to assess that with a better eye than you or than me, and then be able to give us a better idea of what's going on. And then the layers of tissue. So it can get so there's different, not really layers, it's more change in density because they're so closely related, but there's different layers that react differently to different mechanical stimuli. So you have like a fascial layer that reacts to more what we call heat and creep, or like stretch, for example. Then you're going to be able to break hydrogen bonds, and then that tissue becomes less viscous and more fluid, and you get more movement. And then we have the neuromuscular layer that's going to react more to reflexive pathways. So like things like PNF stretching can be super helpful for that. Just changing the sensory information to impact the motor. And then we have the deep layer, which is more of a articular positional change, where you'll have to work through motions more dynamically to be able to change the sensory in the articular layer. So that all being said, it's like, how do I, like, with all that information, how is this useful to me? Because I don't know how to assess each layer, like kind of get lost there. And again, that's going to be a conversation with the practitioner. And then I always just come back to my favorite mobility exercise. And again, there's thousands of schools of thought on different types. Is corrective articular rotations, or even just taking the joints through the ranges of motion. Because if I take my wrist, for example, and I flex, extend, and then I, deviate both sides, I have rotation, then I go to the elbow flexes and extends, supination, pronation, I can kind of isolate joints and take them through a relative stretch, right? Dynamically, I'm taking them through a relative reflexive pathway, because again, I'm flexing one side or contracting one side, relaxing the other side, going through the motions. And then I'm moving the tissue at that deeper level. So that's what I do myself. And then for my clients, we go through corrective articular rotations when they're on their own. And I feel safer with them. Like, it's very tough to put your joint in a position where it's going to injure itself. Just actively, it's very, very tough. It's easier to do passively than it is actively, because they'll have protective mechanisms for that. The only thing you have to be a little bit worried about is that when you're doing something to yourself, like let's say stretching, for example, if you or Tommy were to stretch my hamstring, I would be able to feel that quicker than if I were to stretch it myself, because we have mechanical stimuli coming from the hands as well as the mechanical stimuli, or the relative pain stimuli coming from the hamstring.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think doing it that way makes it easier to program and stuff, give to athletes or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like some of the stuff I was thinking about before hopping on here was like, what's the reasoning behind different like modalities, I guess. Like, people love to foam roll, people love to stretch, people love to do dynamic stretching and all these different things and stuff. But I guess as you're describing it, like each of those things is going to affect a different layer a little bit more specifically. Like the PNF stretching will go after the neuromuscular layer. Foam rolling and stretching will go after a little bit more of the fascia stuff, and then different movements will go after the articular layer, which I mean, it's interesting, but I guess it's really hard to figure out which layer you
exactly. And that's why taking the more general and safer approach, and then leaving the assessment up. Like, if you're a practitioner or whatever, and you know what you're doing, or like you've been in the game a long time and you can differentiate, then for sure, like, tackle that problem. Because again, it's all assessment. Like that, like a PNF stretch or like a myofascial release is relatively easy when you've assessed the problem and you know what's going on. So just more of a general approach for me until I have deciphered what I think the problem is.
And it sounds like it's not a bad thing if you do, like you said, a little bit of foam rolling. If you do a little bit of joint articulation stuff, then at the very least you've done a little bit to address each of those layers, right, or each of those components of mobility. And at the very least you're you're getting the segments of the body or the tissues or structures or whatever to move around. And we know one of the most important things about mobility is to actually keep moving.
Yeah.
Right. If you keep doing stuff on a daily basis, you keep moving. It's tough to lose mobility when you're using it all the time.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. Like movement is movement, right? At the end of the day. The one thing you have to be careful about is, like we talked about, a compensation pattern. It's like, why is that being held there? If I take that out, if I mobilize something that was holding something else up, like what's that going to do to my compensation pattern? And there is a level of just like overtraining, over treatment, like over mobilization, because now you've changed where your cerebellum and your central nervous system, cerebellum is just like a part of your brain, where it thinks you are in space. And it's got to recalibrate and reset its top-down tone to try and rebalance. Because again, we're just trying to keep those eyes level. If you make a lot of changes, you can get sick. You can feel sick because it's all connected with that vestibular system and that posture and balance top-down.
I mean, it's no different than any other adaptation, right?
Mm.
If you've ever worked with a kid who's going through a growth spurt, all of a sudden the kid could squat. Now they're 7 inches taller. They can't squat. They have to relearn how to squat because their segments are different lengths. Or someone who comes back way stronger, way more powerful, produces force differently, and then it changes how they strike a volleyball or, you know, run or anything like that. So it makes sense that the mobility stuff does the same thing. You've created some sort of a change, and now the person has to readapt a skill or a movement or something they're doing to that. In this case, we'll call it a new ability. They have new mobility, they have new range, something they didn't have before.
And I don't mean to say that to scare people away from doing mobility,
No,
but just
not.
have a rationale, like have some intent. Don't just go all willy-nilly and, you know, roll out your whole body like with deep tissue and all this stuff, because that can have a different effect than what you could expect.
One of the things over the years that I've kind of, well, actually pretty recently, I've had like my hip, specifically my hip and my ankle have been tight for a long time. I think we talked to this a little bit last time, but it feels a lot of the time pretty easy to get things moving, but it's harder to keep them moving. You know, like you can warm up, or I feel like I can warm up enough to get things moving and squat okay, and then the next time I have to squat, I got to do all the same stuff or even more, you know, to get that mobility back again. And like it feels sometimes like the warm up just gets longer and longer and longer. You know.
Yeah, it can be tough because it's like, if something keeps coming back, are you at the problem? Or are you at a symptom of the problem? Or does it keep coming back because of something you're doing in your daily life? But you don't want to be in the situation where, like you said, you just keep doing it and doing it and doing it, it comes back, doing it comes back, doing it comes back. You want to be able to do it without that coming back at some point. And you might have to go see somebody who's going to be able to assess and figure out what the true cause is of the immobility coming back.
Yeah, I think a lot of people get stuck like foam rolling. I think a lot of people go, I mean, not to shit on any practitioners, but I think a lot of people go to see a practitioner and they're like, oh, this is tight, you should foam roll it. They foam roll it, feels good. And then so they keep foam rolling it, and then the foam rolling stops working. And then that issue keeps coming back and coming back and coming back. I know I've been there. But yeah, I guess that's just you're not working on the actual problem at that point. Maybe you were, but
maybe it's just something you're doing daily that's making it come back. And yeah, no, like nothing against different practitioners. They have different approaches in how they think about mobility. And that, am I going to tackle it from the motor side, where if there's an immobility, I'm going to tackle it from trying to increase stability on the side that's long, or am I going to try and change the sensory of the side that's short so that it balances out that pulley? And then the whole idea behind assessing, like the body's a dynamic unit of function. Like if you have an immobility at the ankle, it doesn't mean it's an ankle issue. It could be, you know, compensating for the knee, for the hip, for the other knee, for the other ankle, for top down, like how things are getting stacked on top of it. There's so many different possible ways. Like any single compensation you can rationalize could be there. And the only way to figure it out is to look at the body.
Mhm. Yeah, it is crazy when you see like how things connect like that. My chiro told me about some research that he read recently that ankle mobility is correlated very highly with quad activation and like rectus abdominis activation, which I thought was pretty interesting. So yeah, if you don't got your ankles working, then there's a couple other areas to look. As well.
I would just be careful talking in certainties. It's like, oh, this look here, like this look here. What I've found is that like it's almost like a book. The body's like a book. Until you've read the entire thing, you have no idea what's going on. You can't just read the cover, right? You can't just read a page here, the climax of the story or whatever. You have to read the whole book because it's never the same. Never. It's always like, I didn't even think that was possible. Like it's the opposite of what I thought was possible because it's just compensated the other way.
That's a great analogy.
It's like you have to read the whole book. I'm sorry, you can't just read a couple pages.
There's no shortcuts. No, that's a great analogy. I really like that idea of reading the whole book.
Mm-hmm.
There was one last thing I wanted to ask you,
Yes, sir.
and it deals with like isometric contractions.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, if we have movement where the muscle is contracting, relaxing, we know that contributes to the pump and it helps move blood flow. If we have an isometric contraction where the muscle is active and then holding, it can restrict and close up vessels and areas where fluid is potentially moving. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you about was how isometric contractions or holding positions potentially influence the muscle flow, either positively, negatively, maybe it doesn't. Just because I think isometric stuff is so common on lower intensity or recovery days. I love using that type of stuff on off days, right? You look at like McGill's big three, they're isometric actions, holding a plank, a lot of the stability work we do, whether it's a carry, things like that. There's a lot of action in the body where the muscle is active and holding a position. Does that influence anything? Is it something to take into consideration? Should we be using more or less isometric actions on days where we want to promote recovery?
So super cool question. So an isometric, there's no real such thing as a true isometric contraction.
It's
like
always,
even just static posture. Like if you, we were talking about like the center of pressure, center of gravity, there's going to be relative movement. It'd be like almost impossible. And even just how the muscle contracts and stays contracted, even isometrically for long periods of time, there's going to be different motor units coming on and off or whatever, and different like twitches and different fibers are activated, not activated. So there is going to still be a level of pulsation so that blood can come in and out. And there's no absolute occlusion because tissue death, like I think it's like most tissues is within 8 minutes of no oxygen, the tissue will die. So there is going to be a level of pump action there, but you are right in that there is relative more occlusion with an isometric contraction than there is with a moving contraction because you're creating that tension and you're not allowing for expansion and compression. So fluid's going to slow down a little bit more there. And because you have cellular metabolism going on, like you're still working the muscle, there's going to be influence of fluid to come in and blood pressure will go up because of that non-change in shape. Yeah, if that makes sense. But there will be compensations for it, like it's through the central nervous system and that sympathetic nervous system. There'll be vasodilation to a bigger degree so that fluid can still make its way in and out. But isometric contraction training is very interesting in that it almost creates a state where it feels like it's working harder than it is because of this hypoxic state. And there's like those blood flow restriction.
I was going to ask about that.
That's like a new
training
thing. Yeah. That kind of utilizes the same mechanism. I actually got some because a lot of people were asking me about them. I wanted to try them out. But it's the same idea. You're creating an environment where the tissue can't get, it's like a hypoxic state, and there's going to be compensation through the blood vessels to dilate, and then also through like neural, hormonal, and mechanical changes that can influence, like that's the whole blood flow restriction, is that you don't have to work out as hard. We're going to restrict the blood flow so that your body thinks it's working harder than it is, so that you increase the hormonal response and neural changes and stuff.
So then, as a recovery tool, do you think that's like a positive thing, or because I could see people talk about using like varying tempos or varying amounts of like your base of support and stuff like that, so you don't
Mhm.
need as much load to get a training response. So then, therefore, it's less taxing because you're not using as much load.
Mhm.
But then you're also inherently making, and especially in this situation, you're making it like equally or more metabolically demanding.
Mhm.
Um,
So again, I would come back to what that person's baseline is, because most people, like an isometric contraction is like the strongest contraction an individual can do. So like if a person can't really do a squat or can't really do a lunge, and you set them up in an isometric position and you hold that position, that's going to be stronger and safer for them. But from a recovery perspective, in terms of just talking about the pump mechanism, the isometric contraction is not going to create that as much of a pump just mechanically as the, in my opinion, as the concentric eccentric movement. But at the same time, that isometric contraction is going to change the stimulus of the hormonal response, the blood flow response in terms of dilation. So I personally don't know for sure which would be better, but that'd be interesting to study.
So it would maybe come back to the intensity. Like
Yeah.
you said, if someone wasn't strong enough to do a squat and then you have them hold the squat, that's going to be a very challenging demand on that individual, right? Versus someone who could do a plank for 3 minutes and then you hold them in a plank for 30 seconds. So maybe it comes back to the intensity then.
And regardless, there's going to be fluid change.
Yeah.
Like you're creating all that pressure is going to get relieved, and then there's going to be fluid getting sucked in behind it and fluid getting pushed out in front of it. But like to say exactly is one better than the other, I can't say for sure. But either or, it's like either or.
No, but at least globally then,
Mm-hmm.
like if you think about how much fluid you're removing on a recovery day, globally, you're still getting fluid around as a result of that. Maybe in that isolated 15 seconds you're holding something, there's less blood flow. But like you said, the contraction is going to release, you're going to have a change. So at the end of the day, you still, muscles were active, the pump was moving. Like I said, I was just curious because personally, I use a lot of isometric stuff on off days. So I wasn't sure if it's something to consider that maybe I should break them up into smaller isometric chunks or something like that just to help promote the blood flow a little bit better. Or if there were any potential downsides I wasn't thinking about or wasn't aware of that you would have come across because you dive into this a lot deeper than I do.
Yeah. And I think you'd get less muscle damage too doing those isometrics, because most muscle damage comes from the eccentric contraction. So yeah, that would be another avenue you could rationalize. And that's the thing too, is like you can rationalize so many different things, so many different ways, as long as you're comfortable with your rationalization and until someone comes with a better rationalization and it works, and as long as you have one.
It was a potential hole I thought of as a result of our last conversation.
Oh, it's a great question.
I was thinking about all, like you mentioned, it's less metabolically demanding. It's, it promotes tendon health, a lot of things like this. And I'm going, okay, isometrics are really good. And then it was a potential hole that I thought about when you talked about things last week. So that's why I was curious to ask you about it. But that's a great answer. And I will continue to use my isometrics on off days.
Damn right, man.
And just maybe play around with it a little bit. But yeah.
I do also think that there's merit on off days doing things like an isometric or whatever, just because it's different, and making the body move in a different way. And especially like, how often do we actually do isometric contractions throughout? Like in training, you do it, like your core stuff is probably going to be isometric. If you program a specific tempo, like a long pause squat or something like that, then that's some variant of an isometric. But other than that, I don't think there's very much. And then through the day, like you're either relaxed or you're moving, so you're not doing isometric stuff really ever. So like if you talk about like use it or lose it kind of thing, like I don't, I personally, and I think recovery days, it works really well to fit that stuff in. Like when I program deloads for my clients, like that's when they do like all kinds of different stuff. Like that's when they're doing all their carries, when they're doing like, just a lot of movements that they don't normally get the chance to do in training, because it's health related, but it's overall a lower priority,
I'm just glad I don't have to upend my recovery days because Zach's wisdom has told me I don't need to do that. So I was worried about having to completely shake up some things, but
And what, like the last thing for this whole fluid pump, fascial muscular fluid pump, is that it brings more efficacy into the things we're already doing. Like it's a great conversation to have, in that it builds more importance around mobility and movement and stability, and like it's an easier conversation for someone who maybe doesn't have a like a fitness goal or like a mechanical goal, and like I want to jump higher, I want to do this. It's like there's health, just general health benefits to having more mobility and stability and moving more throughout the day beyond just being able to increase that ability. It's like moving fluid around, you're moving health around.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point for sure. Because I think it's hard if people think about being fit and active and for just for the purpose of health. I think a lot of times they think they need to go for a run or they need to go to the gym or whatever, and they need to do things that are hard to do. But if all it takes to live a healthier life is to get up and do a squat every hour, like that's not such a hard thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
it's a good capper, Zach.
It adds to the proof, and it adds to the efficacy of it, and what we're already doing. Right? Adds to the conversation.
There was one more thing that I wanted to ask about cool downs, just your opinion on cool downs. And like, I mean, I haven't looked at a lot of the research, but I've heard that it's like a lot of people say it's important. A lot of people say it doesn't matter at all.
My opinion on cool down is, you come back to that same question: how does the body self-heal and self-regulate? How does the body recover and heal? And again, it's through these mechanisms that we talked about. It's through sleep, it's through movement, it's through stress management, which is where I put my most importance on. In like the actual 10 minutes after a workout, I'm not stretching, I'm not moving more, I'm laying down, I'm breathing, I'm bringing myself back into that parasympathetic sympathetic state, so the body can do what it does. Right? If I finish my workout, I hop in the car, I'm driving, I'm eating, I'm doing all this stuff, and I don't take that second to just like bring myself down, I'm going to be stuck in that sympathetic state even longer. And then again, with all the other recovery pillars, but I always come back to decreasing that stress, because a workout is very stressful.
That's interesting. I mean, I've honestly never thought about using it that way. And a lot of times I feel like I have this kind of post-workout fog sort of thing where you just feel just taxed and like tired, and you can't really focus and you don't really know what's going on. I wonder if that would have like a big impact on that.
So like, just for a practical tip, if you guys want to try it out, or for your clients, I do 4-8 breathing. So in for 4 seconds, out for 8 seconds, until I feel comfortable enough to do a box breath where I can do 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold. And then once I can do that comfortably without like feeling like I need to gas a breath out, I feel like I'm in enough parasympathetic state where I can, because you don't want to be sitting there for a half hour trying to calm down or whatever. But that's like a practical
Jittery
measurement. Yeah. That I'll use if you guys want to try that out.
And do you think it makes sense to just be like lying down or sitting down to do that, or like walking around is fine, or
whatever is most comfortable?
Yeah,
I've done all three. Like sit down, sometimes like I can't really cross my legs very well, so it gets uncomfortable. Or laying down, sometimes your heart's just beating too fast and you want to wait a little bit for it to relax before you lay down. So walking.
It could be fun to play around with.
Yeah. I'll definitely try that.
Good takeaway.
It's also a little bit fun to play around with your music selection for recovery or not purposes.
Zach, did you have anything different, or is it still?
So I'll actually, I have Apple Music, so I'll just like, and I have Alexa. I don't know if do you know who Alexa is, like the Google, or not Google, what is it, Amazon? So I'll just be like, Alexa, play some meditation music. Not while I'm working out, but in between sets, like where I kind of said that I like to try and intentfully relax, or after that workout for that 5-10 minutes. And she always has something nice for me. Some nice calming music. But I can't say, I don't know the names. Like sometimes it's just like tree and, I guess not tree noises, but like birds chirping and stuff.
So this guy's been bumping a lot of DJ Lex in his house.
Yeah, that's solid. I like that. I like that idea. What about you, Tom?
I was going back in the history books. I was listening to a lot of Dio this week. Zach, you probably listen to Dio, classic rock.
I'm really bad with names. I'd have to hear the song. I bet I know the words.
He was the lead for
Sing me a little
Rainbow.
bit. Sing me a little bit.
And then he filled in for Ozzy when Ozzy left Black Sabbath, and then he did his own thing. You've probably heard "Holy Diver" before by Dio.
That sounds familiar.
Holy
Alexa,
Diver,
play it. No, I'm sorry.
you've been down too long in the midnight sea. Dun, 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 dun.
I think she's actually playing music.
Alexa's actually playing music in the background.
Alexa, off. Sorry.
That's all good.
She listens too well. She listens too well, that one.
But yeah, Dio, like awesome, like old school rock, borderline
Check that
metal
out.
when he got going. But yeah, I love the stuff by Dio. Mostly the stuff with Rainbow and his own stuff. I haven't really listened to a lot of the stuff when he was in Sabbath, but the stuff with Rainbow is good. Have you heard of Deep Purple?
Yep.
Zach, old school rock and roll guy, and he's never heard of Deep Purple?
Smoke
Oh.
on the
Probably
water.
heard the music. I don't know the names very well.
Yeah, Smoke on the Water.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Great too.
That's the only one I know.
Okay.
That's the only one.
But yeah, the
Me
lead
too.
guitarist from that band and Dio were in Rainbow together. So like a lot of really good tunes. Some of Dio stuff that he did in the 80s is just unreal. So if you like your old school rock and roll, that's a little bit heavier. You can go check out some Dio. So I was influenced when you were talking last week about the rock and roll. I was like,
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna go listen to some Dio. So yeah, Braden, where were you at this week?
K-pop.
No, sea shanties. Sea shanties. I mentioned
Sea
it.
shanties.
Yeah, it's going to be out of order for the audience, but I did mention it on the one that we recorded most recently, which is Weightlifting 3, which is our first episode is going to be out before that, or after that, sorry. Anyway, yeah, so I was listening to a lot of, like sea shanties are all old songs. Like they were written forever ago, and so many people have made the same version, but I was listening to a lot of the Longest Johns is the band. It's just these four guys from Bristol in the UK that they just sing. But their most recent album, they got a lot more instruments on it, and I really, really liked it. That album was called Cures What Ails Ya. Yeah, really, really solid. Really just love the vibe of a sea shanty, and some of them are pretty like dark and ominous, and like remembering like a pretty tragic event, and then some of them are just ridiculous and silly, and yeah, so that was really good. And then I said that I would remember the group that I like, the old it's an Irish group called the High Kings, and they do a lot of Irish folk songs that are really solid, and some of them are sea shanties, but yeah, I really like their versions of stuff too.
So is that like a quartet, like just four guys? What is that called? Four guys just singing? There's no instruments?
Their first two albums were mostly a cappella.
Acapella, that's what the word I was looking for.
Yeah, where like there's one guy he's the main in most of the songs, and then you've got like a couple guys that sing higher, and then you got the bass that you don't get to hear the bass alone too often, but that's nice.
Wicked.
Yeah, highly.
This guy's so
recommend
influenced by the TikTok crazes.
I don't have
That's
TikTok, Tom.
That's his whole life, you know. Like sea shanties blow up on TikTok, and then all of a sudden, Braden's like, "Yeah, I'm on board. Let's go."
You see him doing like the dance moves in the
Yeah, exactly. I can see it.
Really? Eh? Yeah, that doesn't sound like me.
I've seen him dance. He's got moves.
Yeah, we have seen that.
That's when I've
deny.
had a couple beverages in me.
Oh yeah, the pink
And the
shorts are
salmon
on.
shorts.
Pop,
Yeah,
watch
the
out,
salmon
watch
shorts.
out, baby.
Braden's about to tear up the dance floor.
Yeah.
Well, Zach, thanks for coming out for a couple of great episodes. It was a lot of fun to have you out.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. This was a blast.
Mm-hmm.
And then looking forward to your podcast coming out soon too. So that'll be exciting.
Yeah, thanks,
So-
man. Super excited about that too.
Do you guys have
Hopefully
a
in the
name?
near future? Like a date?
A name, sorry.
Oh, a name. Yeah, so we called it the Why It Depends podcast.
Oh, nice.
It
always
depends.
depends.
Great phrase.
Yeah,
love
but you
that
can't just say it depends. You got to talk about why it depends. That's an empty answer.
Nailed
Very
it.
cool. Very cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. No date though. But
No date.
we'll have to-
Hopefully in the next couple, like end of February, hopefully.
nice.
We'll share it with people
I'll
for
appreciate
sure
it.
on the show account. We'll let people know that you're bringing some good stuff into the game. So
Much appreciated, guys.
Maybe we'll have to have you back to launch that yourself.
Mhm.
But we'll see. So, but yeah, thank you. This was great, very informative, and I mean, we definitely want to have you back at some point to talk about something smart.
Google this stuff first and see. Check the resources. He's just talking nonsense. No, I really appreciate this. It was a lot of fun, guys. Super jazzed up every single time I get to come on here and talk to you guys.
Yeah. So yeah, if anyone wants to reach out to us, then Speed Strength Show for the show, and Braden Southern for me, and Adaptive_Athletics for Zachary. Correct?
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Right on. Then anybody else got anything? No? Thanks for coming along, world. That was the Speed Strength Show.
we will see you next week.
Peace.